Hello everyone, good afternoon. We will get started in about 1 minute just to give people a chance to log in. So just give us 1 minute and we'll begin the webinar. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erin Steffen. I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at Carbonite, and today I am joined with Ryan Crompton, our Product Manager for our brand new offering. And today we want to talk with you all and introduce Carbonite's backup for Microsoft Office 365 applications. I'm going to hand it over to Ryan in a second, but first, if anybody has any questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to chat them. There, you should have a questions panel on the right-hand side. We'll be taking questions at the end. So if anyone has any questions with anything that Ryan covers throughout this presentation, we'll be able to answer them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan Crompton to introduce Carbonite Backup for Office 365.
Great, and thank you for the introduction, Erin. My name is Ryan Crompton, Product Manager for the Carbonite Backup for Office 365 solution. Our goals as we go through this presentation today include a discussion as to why it is essential for businesses to back up the data contained in their Office 365 applications, what Microsoft is responsible for and what the customer is responsible for, how Carbonite Backup for Office 365 can help you fill the gaps in data protection, as well as a brief demonstration of the product. As Erin mentioned, if you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the questions box on the GoToWebinar. We'll address those questions at the end if they're not addressed during the course of the presentation. Having said that, let's begin. So the first question that often arises in people's minds with respect to Office 365 is, why would I need to back it up? Doesn't Microsoft already do that for me? And to some extent, the answer is yes, but in many cases, the answer is also no. Microsoft has a dual mandate, what you might even consider a conflicting mandate, in that it is obligated to keep the service available and ensure that short-term incidents are readily remediable through their tools. On the other hand, Microsoft is also obligated to ensure that customers' privacy is maintained absolutely, which includes honoring data deletion requests issued with the proper authorization and authentication. In other words, if Microsoft receives a legitimate request from an end user to delete content, Microsoft has no way of distinguishing whether that deletion request is issued out of malice or out of a genuine expectation on the part of the end user to delete the content. It's worth mentioning that for many organizations that came from an on-premise infrastructure, there was a requirement to maintain availability, oftentimes through the use of things like with Exchange database availability groups, or with SharePoint, things like SQL clustering, as well as backup in order to preserve historical data and ensure regulatory and compliance regimes are met. Microsoft does a phenomenal job at maintaining the availability of the Office 365 solution. Outages, when they occur, are generally brief and limited in impact. But Microsoft cannot provide a backup solution, as Microsoft is obligated to ensure that requests for data to be removed from the Office 365 solution are met in a timely fashion. Beyond that, Microsoft is oriented towards providing a solution, but not necessarily providing support for it. That's something they prefer help desk and IT personnel closer to the end user manage. As such, the restore processes available through Office 365 tend to be manual, time-consuming, and otherwise cumbersome for IT personnel and end users. Thus, third-party solutions are often introduced to remedy those gaps. Finally, cybersecurity is driving a significant concern with respect to Office 365. As productive content has been removed from endpoints and on-premise infrastructure to productivity and collaboration suites such as Office 365, that data becomes increasingly more valuable as it's located in one place and thus accessible by anyone with sufficient credentials to get to it. As such, we're seeing an increase in the likes of spear phishing, as well as attacks specifically targeted on Office 365 global admins in order to either ransom or corrupt their data. So to answer the question, why do you need to protect Microsoft Office 365 data? It's because Microsoft provides great availability of the Office 365 suite, but backup, as well as regulatory and governance and compliance considerations, still fall squarely within the realm of the customer. When we talk about responsibilities for this, it's again sometimes easier to think in terms of an on-premise paradigm. Microsoft protects against loss of service due to hardware or infrastructure failure. In other words, if an Azure data center has a server or hard drive die, it's not going to impact the end users who are using Office 365 in that environment. Similarly, they hedge against end user error by providing things like the recycle bin or OneDrive file restore. But the customer is still responsible for day-to-day administrative tasks like onboarding and offboarding users, meeting whatever regulatory or compliance regimes they may be subject to, as well as ensuring that end users are complying with whatever the data retention requirements of the business are. So, to that end, Carbonite is offering its backup for Office 365 in the form of two offerings. First, Carbonite Endpoint 360, which is a bundled offering that includes both our endpoint protection product to back up content on endpoints, as well as content stored within Office 365. In addition to this, we are offering a standalone Carbonite Backup for Microsoft Office 365 in order to permit organizations that have moved entirely to the Office 365 productivity suite to back it up. So what does Carbonite Backup for Office 365 do? First, it's worth noting, and this is a distinguishing feature for Carbonite Backup for Office 365, in that it is able to protect the entirety of the Office 365 suite. That includes SharePoint, which includes not only SharePoint sites, but site collections, documents, document libraries, and security and permission settings for those. OneDrive, Exchange, Teams, Planner, Project, the rest of the applications you see listed there on the left-hand side. We offer a granular restore capability, which includes the ability to recover individual items. For example, within mailboxes, this can include individual messages, folders, as well as entire mailboxes. In the context of OneDrive, This can include the entirety of a OneDrive, folders, or individual files. And within the context of SharePoint, this can include individual documents, document libraries, as well as sites and site collections. We offer a rapid recovery in order to facilitate data loss remediation. This is a cloud-to-cloud solution. In other words, Carbonite maintains the backup infrastructure and communicates directly with Azure in order to facilitate the backup. This allows recovery to happen very quickly in the event recovery is needed and generates no on-premise dependencies for our customers. Our objective with this solution is to ensure that the experience of the backup product mirrors that of Office 365. In other words, that there's no requirement to have anything on-premise and that there's nothing else required of the administrators to implement beyond permitting the application to function as it normally would. We offer an RPO of 6 hours, so that's backing up 4 times per day. Retention can be anywhere between 1 year and indefinite. The most popular retention options are 1 year, 3 year, and 7 year, though we do have flexibility beyond that as well. And then finally, we do offer 24/7 support. Carbonite's award-winning support, many of you have had experience with them. We're happy to extend that same support model to our Carbonite Backup for Office 365 customers. So how does this solution work? First, a global administrator for Office 365 would be expected to authorize our application to back up the environment. And we'll show you how that functions in the demonstration that we'll be conducting here shortly. Once you've selected the applications you wish to back up, as well as, if necessary, the individual users whose mailboxes and OneDrives you wish to back up, or the SharePoint sites that you wish to back up, the solution will then run automatically 4 times per day, every 6 hours. Again, for many of you coming from an on-premise paradigm, this represents an RPO that may be 4 times better than the once a day backup that was generally achieved with SharePoint and Exchange. In the event that recovery is necessary, first, it bears mentioning that there's no additional cost in the event recovery is necessary. If you need to talk to our support, similarly, there's no per ticket cost there either. When a recovery is done, it can be performed with very fine-grained granularity, including, as mentioned, to the file, message, or permissions level. And we also offer full fidelity restore. In other words, we can recover content in such a way that security permissions are preserved as our sharing permissions. We do offer search in order to facilitate recovery of content from the Office 365 applications that we do back up. Oftentimes, end users may not remember exactly what it was they lost, or there may be insufficient detail to pinpoint a precise point in time at which the content was generated. For these types of scenarios, we offer the ability to readily search and recover based on the search query. So, what all can we back up? Might actually be a little bit easier to describe what we cannot back up, but in the interest of being thorough, we support full backup for, first of all, Exchange Online. That includes mailboxes, calendars, conversations, and so on. This includes the archive elements of mailboxes, as well as any shared mailboxes that might exist within the environment. For OneDrive, this includes all of the Office documents that might be generated and placed into OneDrive, as well as any other files a user might put into OneDrive. This also includes the sharing settings for the OneDrive files placed into OneDrive as well. For Teams, we can back up team chat as well as the team channel information. For SharePoint, we support, as mentioned, sites, lists, and libraries. OneDrive exists as a SharePoint site on a per user basis. So we're able to capture, of course, all of the SharePoint information that backs individual user OneDrives, group files, group notebooks, as well as files stored within Teams. Finally, we also support backup of Planner, which includes plans, buckets, and tasks. And not listed here, but we do support backup of project as well. The only elements of Office 365 that we do not back up include Skype for Business, which is currently being deprecated by Microsoft, Yammer, which is not commonly used for business productivity and collaboration purposes, and then Dynamics, which is licensed and managed separately from Office 365. Okay, but everything else we can cover without incident, without question. So, as mentioned, we back up the entirety of Office 365. One of the findings that we have found through research with some of our partners includes that more than 1 in 4 companies do not protect content stored within Office 365. As Office 365 is getting bigger and more critical for businesses, the need to back it up in turn becomes more critical as well. For example, SharePoint is replacing in many cases the use of local network shares. In some cases, it's also serving as an ad hoc CRM for smaller businesses for whom Dynamics or Salesforce might be overkill or too expensive. Email serves now, of course, as the primary form of communication, but even beyond that, Teams serves a very critical communications niche. And being able to back up content stored within Teams provides a means by which businesses can recover critical information too. The larger point here is that Microsoft's goal with Office 365 is to provide more or less one-stop shopping for all business collaboration and productivity needs. In so doing, the data that gets placed within the bounds of Office 365 becomes more critical, and the personnel tasked with managing that data, the Office 365 global administrators, in turn become richer targets for those that would do malicious things with the data they protect. So a little bit of pricing information for folks on the line here. For the standalone product, Office 365 backup pricing starts at $48 per seat per year, roughly $4 per seat per month list price. That includes both a consumption-based model at 100 gigabytes per license or an unlimited model in which the number of Office 365 licensed users are in turn licensed for backup, and the entirety of the Office 365 environment can then be backed up. Our goal here is actually to minimize licensing complexity. To that end, for the unlimited offering, if an organization has, say, 20 E3 seats licensed, they would buy 20 backup licenses from us, and they would be able to back up all of their SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, Project, Planner, and so on. For a lot of solutions, pricing can get very complex very quickly, as things like SharePoint do not really belong within the realm of any individual user. And as such are licensed by some of our competitors independently. Our goal is to keep it simple. If you have 20 people using Office 365 today, you can get a quote from us for 20 licenses and know that that is the extent of what you would need to pay to back up the entirety of the Office 365 environment. So let's go ahead and take a look at the solution. As I'm fond of saying, the proof is in the pudding. We can talk about what we can do, but without being able to visualize it, it's largely just words. So let's go ahead and take a step through the solution. So the first thing that a customer will receive upon signing up for Carbonite Backup for Office 365 is an invitation to administer the solution. This is fairly typical. If you've interacted with Carbonite products before, you've probably seen an email very similar to this one. You're given a login, click on a URL, and that'll take you to the Carbonite Backup for Office 365 administration page. Whereupon you will be asked to authorize our backup solution by registering or authorizing an application profile. This serves a number of purposes. First, an application profile allows us to comply with Microsoft's requirements for API gatekeeping and API throttling. Secondly, it precludes the need for us to store any of your credentials. Carbonite really has no desire to, whether theoretically or otherwise, serve as a potential for any kind of data loss. As such, any solution in which we can leverage off-the-shelf federation paradigms is going to be preferred. The takeaway here is that you can permit our application to back up your environment without releasing any of your Office 365 credentials, including those belonging to your Office 365 global administrators, to us. So you can ensure your credentials remain secure while the backup solution is in place. Once the application has been authorized, you can then select which content you wish to back up. Our out-of-the-box mode is going to be our express mode, which will automatically detect any new mailboxes, OneDrive, or SharePoint added to the Office 365 environment and begin backing them up, as well as backing up everything that already exists within the environment. So this tends to be easiest, especially given the sprawling nature of many Office 365 environments today. Microsoft's goal with Office 365 over the years has been to increasingly simplify the administration, which it's been largely successful in doing. However, that has resulted, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, in both SharePoint as well as mailbox sprawl. This can create some complexities for administrators, as being faced with a decision as to what to back up when each object has a price associated with it can become quite a cumbersome task unto itself. Thus, the default mode for Carbonite Backup for Office 365 is to simply back up everything, thus precluding the need to determine and thus price what individual content would need to be backed up. If you do have more specific needs as far as what is being backed up, and we can delineate a few examples of those here shortly, we do support the ability to register particular objects based on their Office 365 or Azure Active Directory attributes. For example, if you have an organization of, say, 500 users, of whom the critical data belongs to E5 Office 365 subscribers, you can use advanced registration to identify mailboxes and OneDrive associated with an E5 subscription and back only those up. So we do support flexibility beyond just back up everything if you wish to avail yourselves of it. As mentioned, once you've selected Express mode, in other words, back up everything, you can then select which applications you wish to back up. You'll note here on this list Mailbox, which is essentially synonymous with Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, Office 365 Groups, We're one of a very distinct few backup for Office 365 solutions that can back up the entirety of a Office 365 group, exchange online public folders if you make use of public folders, particularly if you're coming from a legacy on-premise Exchange environment. This may be useful to you. And then project online site collections. Project, again, will have varying uptake depending on what vertical an organization is in, as well as whether they have a particular use for project. So there's no need to actually select all of the applications for backup here if they're not being used, but we do offer that facility here as well. Once the applications have been selected, they will then be backed up according to the schedule defined by the administrator. You'll note that this is a very simplistic menu here on the left-hand side, little more than Home and Office 365 backup, which includes the restore and scheduling settings, are offered. That's done intentionally. The expectation with this solution, as it is with Office 365 itself, is that there may be a number of individuals within any organization that have deep and intricate knowledge of how Office 365 works, that are thus entitled to interact with it extensively. But many organizations also employ a larger number of help desk personnel whose sole responsibility is to facilitate end user productivity. To that end, we separate the administrative tasks, in other words, setting up the account, managing the application profile, determining what gets backed up, from the backup visuals you see here. For a typical help desk person, the content delineated here is not going to be of any particular interest. If an end user has lost a file, that can easily be recovered using the simpler to use backup and recovery dashboard that we have here. So for organizations that have a multi-tiered help desk and IT management structure, this is particularly beneficial as it reduces the learning curve to bringing this solution online. You'll note here that each application is individually marked and delineated as well. Exchange Online, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, Groups, Teams, and Project. For those of you who wish to ensure that your backup is behaving both as we say it would and as you would expect it to be, we do offer straightforward visualizations of the backup behavior in addition to email notifications. Again, our goal here is to avoid overly cumbersome reporting. So if you wish to determine what was successfully backed up, the most recent job, you can simply click on the application, get backup details, and what was most recently backed up will be displayed here. Again, simplicity is our goal. Microsoft's objective, among many, with Office 365 was to abstract a large amount of the infrastructure and management complexity behind easy-to-use administrative workflows. We don't wish to have the backup solution be any more complex than Office 365 itself. So to that end, our goal is, where possible, to err on the side of simplicity while still providing powerful tools for backup. Okay. If you wish to determine if an individual mailbox or OneDrive, or whatever the case may be, is in fact backed up or in the process of being backed up, you can do so here as well. Some IT administrators like to be able to view what is going on with a high level of granularity within their environment. We understand that. We want to make sure that you do have the necessary reporting tools to learn or determine what's going on to your satisfaction. Speaking of, whenever a backup is completed, notification will be made available. These notifications can again be set to occur when a backup occurs regardless of the result code of the backup to be sent only if a failure occurs, or to be sent only if the backup was successful. Some organizations prefer to have daily reporting even if nothing is going wrong. Others prefer only to receive an email in the case of an error. It's worth mentioning here that, as I stated previously, Microsoft maintains very high availability for the entirety of the Office 365 infrastructure. But as I'm sure you've noticed, especially those of you who've worked extensively with Office 365, you'll occasionally attempt to use a PowerShell commandlet on a mailbox and get back an error, or attempt to upload something into OneDrive and it'll fail. This is normal and expected. With any infrastructure, there are hiccups. Microsoft periodically takes boxes offline to perform maintenance, and for the most part, it goes unnoticed. But when you have thousands of mailboxes and literally millions of OneDrive objects, there will occasionally be a time when Microsoft is performing maintenance on something at the same time we're attempting to back it up. Thus, we'll see here, number of failed objects, number of skipped objects in the event that a backup is unsuccessful. We do leverage retry logic in our backup workflow. Chances are anything that gets missed in one backup will get picked up in the next backup. But again, due to the overly cautious nature of backup administration, we wish to ensure that backup administrators are apprised of what is going on within their environment. So we've talked about backup, really, which can be done in just a handful of steps. For most organizations that use Carbonite Backup for Office 365 today, onboarding can be done in 20 minutes or less. The exceptions to that include organizations with highly restrictive security models, which we'll describe here in a moment, and organizations with more than about 300 to 500 seats, as they, again, tend to have higher security requirements that thus take a little bit longer to address within the context of setup. Having said that, getting things onboarded requires simply authorizing the app, selecting the applications you wish to back up, and then ensuring that the backup successfully executes. Many organizations will wish to go through a restore with our onboarding and implementation team as well, for a number of reasons. It's generally easier to understand how the restore works before it becomes critical in the event of data loss to do so. Secondly, many organizations wish to reassure themselves that what Carbonite is promising is in fact what is happening. We have every confidence that you'll find the recovery workflow works to your satisfaction. So, if you wish to recover content, select Restore, and then select the application whose content you wish to recover. Different applications will have different content types. For example, OneDrive for Business is going to be entirely drives, folders, and files. SharePoint is going to include various security and permission settings, as well as different levels of granularity, because the content described within SharePoint is in fact different. When you elect to recover content, you will be able to search within a specified time range, as well as by keyword, as well as which level of granularity, mailbox, content, folder, you wish to search on. So to give you one example of something that we have seen, an end user leaves the company. His successor, 13 months later, tells his boss, hey, my predecessor had a contract with a company we do business with, and that contract was emailed. Can you recover that contract from my predecessor's email? Because there is discrepancy between what the customer described as being offered and what we have on record. And these types of discrepancies can, in some cases, cost significant sums of money. We've had a number of examples of that occur, both within Mailbox and within SharePoint recovery. Having said that, in the event something like that does occur, it's unlikely that the new employee is going to know exactly when that email got sent, but he'll have a rough idea of when and will know what he needs to search on. So in this case, specify the search criteria and the date range, and the content that matches those criteria will be returned. Alternately, items can be located in a particular backup job. If an employee discovers that he's about to be terminated on Friday and goes through and purges all of his mailbox on Thursday, then the backup on Friday is not going to be particularly useful, as the mailbox itself will contain probably nothing. So in cases like that, we do support the ability to select items in a specific backup job. This has a number of other applications beyond the one I just described, though that is one that most organizations will be institutionally familiar with. So once the recovery point or points have been selected, you can then select the granularity of the data you wish to recover and then how you wish to recover it. You'll note here on the left-hand side, we're showing a number of mailboxes. If you need to recover the entirety of the mailbox, that's easily facilitated simply by selecting the mailbox there on the left and then selecting either restore or export. And those two options do merit some discussion on their own. With respect to export, we support export of selected content within either PST format, or if it's not a mailbox, either the native file format for something like OneDrive or .dat format for SharePoint and others. This is useful as part of end user offboarding as well as legal discovery. For those of you who work within strictly regulated environments, you've probably seen lawsuit discovery requests specifying data as of a particular time or belonging to a particular user within a format that is easily readable. So to that end, we support export in PST format as of any particular recovery point for mailboxes. Discovery requests as well as other similar such things can be more narrowly scoped. So to that end, we do support export only of selected content within a mailbox to PST as well. So if you wish to export only an end user's inbox, or if an end user made considerable use of folders, if you wish to export a particular folder, that's supported as well. So just note that anything that you see here can be both recovered within the context of Office 365, a workflow I'll show you here in a moment, as well as exported to PST or other readable format. So once the content is selected, you as an administrator can then determine the behavior upon restore of this content. Some of these options will vary by application because, again, the application data is going to vary just depending on where it resides within Office 365. So first thing, you'll note there on the left, a description is supported. Oftentimes, restore requests go through a ticketing system. So if you're using something like ServiceNow for your help desk, an end user or SharePoint admin may submit a ticket. Please recover items X, Y, and Z. So you can drop that ticket ID into the description in order to ensure that, should anyone choose to audit a functionality I'll show you here in a moment, audit the restore request down the road, they'll understand why it's happening. Secondly, on the left, where would you like to restore this data? You'll note that the ability to restore data to another location is supported as well. For mailboxes, this can include restoring to an alternate mailbox. For things like SharePoint, this can include restoring to an alternate site. There are a number of use cases for this also. Microsoft's preferred workflow when an end user departs an organization is to turn their mailbox into a shared mailbox and give the successor access to that mailbox. Office 365 has, at this point, been around long enough that some organizations have seen sufficient turnover that they now have more shared mailboxes than end user mailboxes. Moreover, this creates complexity for the end users as they may be granted access to 5 or 6 shared mailboxes upon gaining their own Office 365 account. This tends to actually inhibit productivity, as for many of these end users, they don't know what they can or should be looking for within these shared mailboxes. So, in order to simplify the predecessor to successor relationship, you can simply restore all of an end user's particular email to his or her successor. And again, if use is made of the folders functionality within the mailbox, only email belonging to certain workflows, accounts, and so on for that end user can be moved over. In the event of doing things like OneDrive for Business, where file names may be identical, you can select whether to skip content, overwrite content with what's being recovered, overwrite by whatever has the most recent M time, or pull down from the recovery and then append _1 to the recovered document. Again, different use cases may apply for each of these. So let's say that somebody is impacted by ransomware, which is not uncommon whatsoever within Office 365 environments. If anything, it's becoming more and more common as due to the synchronizing nature of OneDrive, it's fairly straightforward for it to be impacted by ransomware residing on a personally owned machine. In a case like that, the administrator is going to need to bring back an earlier version of the content. So overriding that content is clearly going to be what's indicated. On the other hand, if an end user mistakenly deletes some of his or her content, but does not recall what it was he or she deleted, anything that already exists can safely be skipped and only deleted content recovered. So you do have a great level of granularity here with how content level conflicts are managed. In addition to this, for things like SharePoint, we do support the ability to recover permissions only, which you see there as restore security only, as well as restore content to alternate locations. That's the alternate SharePoint site I mentioned earlier. In addition to this, we also support recovery of version history. In the event that there is a question of what is the most appropriate version to place back into production, you can restore an unlimited number of versions, whatever your retention window, whether it be 1 year, 3 years, 7 years, unlimited supports, to evaluate side by side. Again, this is distinctive functionality that we offer, as it does allow you to readily determine in the event there is the possibility of a mistake being made as far as what version is going to be recovered into production, to evaluate all recoverable versions side by side. So we're very proud of this. We have what we feel is one of the best restore granularity and conflict resolution models available for Office 365 software, and it can support many use cases beyond just backup and recovery. We offer the ability to monitor all job progress. So this is useful for both an audit and attestation perspective. If you're obligated to provide evidence that backups are occurring on an ongoing and regular basis, you can easily export job information here. Likewise, if you want to see what's been recovered, we support filtering on that. This is all fairly straightforward job auditing, nothing too earth-shattering, but nonetheless, nice to have. I'll go ahead and dive into the advanced options here just before we jump into questions, as these may address some of the questions that have been posed. First, as I mentioned, we do by default make available the ability to back up everything. For customers for whom this would not be acceptable, you can filter based on Azure Active Directory attributes, as well as other properties, including the Office 365 subscription, what department they're a member of, and so on. And then finally, we do support customer managed encryption. This is a big deal for organizations that, again, are subject to highly restrictive security regimes. In this case, our solution supports the customer selecting the encryption key and key set he or she wishes to use by way of the customer maintaining his or her own Azure Key Vault. So this is the customer's Azure Key Vault within the customer's Azure subscription. You can link that Key Vault to the Office 365 backup tool. In so doing, in the event for whatever reason a customer no longer wishes for Carbonite to be able to recover content, can simply revoke the key identifier, the key that Carbonite was referencing, and in so doing, eliminate any access to that content. Okay, that is the extent of my presentation. I'd like to take this time to answer any questions that have been posed. Erin, have we seen any questions here yet?
Yes, we have. And I'd actually like if you could flip back, as always, we have a lot of questions about pricing. I think some people jumped in late. So if you want to go back to the pricing slide, and two of the questions that we had were, one, what do we mean when we say per seat? Is that a license? Is that a person? And then the second question was about just a brief explanation of the 100 gig versus the unlimited gig pricing.
Yeah. My apologies for not delving into that in sufficient depth. So let's go ahead and discuss the pricing model. So bear with me while I scroll back here. As I'm doing that, the two models available are unlimited and per 100 gigabytes. So for the unlimited model, can you see this screen now?
I do not know. It's still on the customer managed encryption.
Okay, my apologies. 1 second.
And while we're flipping to there, we did get a question if we offer a trial of this product. Yes, we do. If you go to the Carbonite website, I can put the chat in the link. There is a 30-day trial of the solution. Okay, now we can see it, Ryan. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So for the unlimited offering, again, that's going to include the entirety of the Office 365 environment. So the way we will quote and model that is based on the number of Office 365 users with a business premium, or E-level subscription within Office 365 that have been assigned. So let me give you an example here that might make this a little bit more straightforward. Let's say you've got an organization with 50 Office 365 E3 licenses purchased, of which 42 are currently assigned to end users and 8 are not assigned to anybody. If you go to buy Carbonite Backup for Office 365, then you would need to buy 42 unlimited backup licenses from us, and that would entitle you to back up the entirety of your organization. We do it this way both for the sake of simplicity and because of the way environments typically scale. It makes the best sense for everybody. So you tell us how many Office 365 licenses you currently have assigned. We can very readily tell you, okay, we can back up the entirety of your environment, no questions asked, for the following. I would add to that too that the only licenses we're interested in are business premium, and the E-level licenses. If you've got kiosk licenses, we don't require that you pay for a backup license for those, as those typically belong to end users who do not generate a considerable amount of content. The 100 gigabyte license is charged back on a consumption-based model. So let's say that you've got an organization that has 1 terabyte worth of SharePoint in which all customer relevant documentation is stored. And it's this SharePoint site that represents key data for the institution. So in that case, they might say, okay, we don't really need to back up our end users' mailboxes because they're not supposed to keep anything valuable in them. We really just need this particular SharePoint site backed up. So how much would 1 terabyte of protection cost? In that case, it would be 10 100 gigabyte licenses to back up that 1 terabyte worth of SharePoint. This is usually more in the realm of organizations that either generate a limited amount of data per user or that have specific backup needs that apply to particular applications within the environment. Does that answer the question?
Yes,
Okay.
I think we are good with pricing. I do want to move on because we have some other questions. If we could flip to this slide that shows everything that we're backing up, so the comprehensive view. We did have some questions on what version of Microsoft Office 365 client you need to have, whether or not we support Access. So if we could just do a brief overview of what we support and what is being backed up.
Yeah, you bet. So with respect to Access, we do not back up Access today. As far as client level, we don't really concern ourselves with what's running on the various endpoints within the organization. We're only concerned with, because again, this is cloud to cloud backup, we don't actually need to communicate with the endpoint at all. Nor is there any dependency for the user to have his machine online in order to back up his content.
Oh, Ryan, we might have lost you there for a second.
Oh, can you still hear me?
Yep, we can now.
Okay, my apologies. So we're not really concerned with the client version because we're not touching the endpoints as part of this backup process. We really just need a way to communicate with, in the case of things like email, Exchange Online, what version of Outlook, if any, the end users are running on their endpoints is not relevant to the backup workflow. I want to make sure I'm answering the questions people are asking. Does that address what was asked there, Aaron?
It does look like it. We do have, let's see here, comprehensive backup, including all app backup, not just Exchange. That was a question that we had. And the different, I think I mentioned the different tier versions that they may have of actually of Office 365.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about subscription levels then.
Yes.
By different tiers. Yeah. So with respect to the tiering, from our perspective, it doesn't really matter what tier you're on. We can back it up provided it's accessible through Exchange Online. So if you're one of the, let's say, legacy customers that used on-premise SharePoint for OneDrive, we can't back that up because it exists within your infrastructure and not within Azure. But that, generally speaking, doesn't apply to anyone who shifted to Office 365 in the past 4 or 5 years. And then as far as subscription level, anyone that has Office 365 Business or Enterprise, we can back up their content.
Excellent. I think we had a few current Carbonite customers join us today for today's webinar, so we did have a few questions on where we're backing up. This is different than where we back up our Carbonite Safe solution and our Carbonite Server solution. So if we could just give an overview of the deployment, where we're backing up, how this impacts, how is this different from existing Carbonite solutions we have today?
Yeah, so perfectly fine. So we back this up using Microsoft Azure. So For our United States customers, we're using US Azure East. For our non-US customers, this is going to be Azure France. And Carbonite maintains the infrastructure. There's no requirement or dependency on customers to have their own Azure subscription, blob storage, or anything else of that nature in order to affect the backup. So that's included in the cost of the service and is something that we provide.
Great. And I think we did have another question about what happened. So I think we had a few people who maybe jumped in late who are wondering, why we do need to back up our Office 365 applications. Doesn't Office 365 Cloud do this automatically? And then one of the other questions was just explaining about ransomware and how our solution would help protect if someone didn't indeed get infected with ransomware.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and cover both of those. Unfortunately, that's two different places in the slide deck. So let me answer the first question first, which is why do we need to back this up? And if for those of you who are familiar with on-premise management, you would have been expected to provide availability. In other words, your end users expect email to be available generally around the clock, as well as backup. In the event somebody, say, deletes data, then you are obligated under some compliance regimes to be able to provide a way to recover it. Microsoft has no way of distinguishing between a legitimate request from an authorized global admin and a perhaps malicious request from an end user seeking to delete or ransom his company's data. Now let me give you a more perhaps practical example of that. Some compliance regimes within the United States require data to be maintained anywhere between 3 and 7 years. If you're an academic institution, you're probably familiar with FERPA. If you're a financially regulated institution, probably familiar with FINRA. Each of which require data to be kept between 3 and 7 years past the point of its generation if the subject of that data is subject to the compliance regime. So if it's financial data under FINRA, 7 years, you've got to keep it. Now, if you've got an end user who has access to a SharePoint site in which data subject to that regulatory requirement is kept, that data can be deleted by that end user. And Microsoft is going to honor that because Microsoft has a dual mandate. That dual mandate includes they have to make the data available because that's what they're obligated to do as part of the service. But Microsoft also has zero desire to get into trouble for keeping data past when a customer wishes to remove it. So if a delete request is issued for content, Microsoft has no way of distinguishing whether it's regulated content subject to these regulatory regimes or just something that legitimately needs to be deleted. Microsoft is going to delete it, and it's going to delete it permanently because Microsoft wants to ensure that there's no way that data could be recovered because, again, privacy is becoming an increasing concern. So Microsoft does a phenomenal job at keeping Office 365 available, but it still doesn't solve for the backup side of the equation. In the age of on-prem stuff, like Exchange database availability groups, it's highly unlikely an Exchange administrator would be satisfied with simply maintaining a DAG without having a backup of the content, because previous versions of that content may be subject to regulatory requirements. It may also have impact on the business profitability or other custom. For example, if a end user emails one of his or her customers information, say a quote, that quote may then become the basis for a discrepancy between what, say, the business quoted a customer and what the customer received from his or her sales rep. There's all kinds of imaginable issues that may arise when previous versions of data are unavailable. So that's why you need to protect it. Microsoft, again, if somebody wants something deleted and they have permission to delete it, then it can be deleted. and Microsoft doesn't really want to touch that. So that's why a backup application is still necessary. Microsoft has solved for the availability side of the equation without a question, but backup is still necessary and still relevant. Did see a question here about HIPAA as well. Yes, so if you've got HIPAA compliant data within your Office 365 environment, we can back that up if you wish us to back it up. If you're concerned about our access to the data, we support customers bringing their own encryption key by way of Azure Key Vault as well. I see here a question about ITAR. So Microsoft recently updated its regulatory guidance with respect to some ITAR elements. I'm not sure if your sales rep is on the line, but that's something I'll speak with him or her about because it depends a little bit on the nature of the ITAR data you're storing. There was one other question about application protection memory serves. Aaron, if you could elucidate further.
Yes, we had access and then different versions of Exchange.
So I'm not entirely sure I'm tracking the query regarding different versions of Exchange as...
It looks like Exchange Server, Exchange Online Backup, Online Archive. Okay,
yeah, so we can back up archive mailboxes associated with end users' primary mailboxes. Those of you who've been using Office 365 for a while know that initially it was 50 gigabytes per mailbox. Anything in excess of that went into archive. We can back up the archive mailboxes as well, no problem.
Okay, great. I think we're 2 minutes over, and so I'm sure people wouldn't have to jump. Ryan, if you could just pull up the final screen with the email alias. And so I know we still have, there's a lot of questions people have about pricing, a lot of questions from current customers. I would implore you all to reach out to your sales representative. The best email address, if you have questions, Ryan just put it up on the screen. It's dataprotectionsales@carbonite.com. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Ryan, for this incredible presentation. We're really excited about this new solution. We hope you are too. We will be sending a follow-up email with this recording, and there will be more to come. Look for blog posts. Our website has a ton of great content, a new ebook about the reasons to back up your Microsoft Office 365 applications. So thank you for all attending today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up. Thanks again.